The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and dust, as though it carried decades of secrets within its walls. A heavy silence pressed down on everyone seated, the kind of silence that vibrated with tension before a storm. At the center of it all sat David, the younger brother of Elena, his face pale but his posture defiant. He was only 24, still carrying the restless energy of youth, but his eyes burned with a quiet determination. Across the aisle, his brother-in-law Marcus lounged in his chair with a smug confidence that filled the room like smoke. Marcus was the kind of man who wore arrogance like a tailored suit, sharp, deliberate, and meant to cut. Today, he seemed almost eager, like a predator circling its prey. Elena sat in the middle, torn between blood and vows. She stared at the floor, her hands clutched tightly in her lap, trembling. She knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was the unraveling of her family. Judge Anderson, an older man with wise eyes and an aura of restrained patience, shuffled some papers and raised his head.
Let's begin.
Mr. Marcus, you're the plaintiff here.
You may start.
Marcus stood with the kind of rehearsed ease that made people dislike him even before he spoke. His voice was calm, deep, and dripping with false politeness. Your Honor, Marcus began, flashing a confident smile, we are here today because of the reckless, immature, and frankly dangerous actions of my wife's brother. David has not only disrespected me as family but has deliberately sabotaged my career, my reputation, and, by extension, my marriage. He turned slightly toward David, his lips curling. A boy pretending to be a man, trying to destroy what he cannot comprehend. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Elena's face flinched as if she'd been slapped. David gripped the edge of the table.
That's not true, he blurted.
His voice cracked with frustration, but Marcus was already pressing forward, savoring the spotlight.
Not true.
Marcus mocked, raising an eyebrow. Shall I read aloud the messages you sent, threatening to expose me unless I backed out of a major deal? Or the recordings where you slandered me to my clients? Should we play those now, in front of everyone? He let the words dangle in the air, poison dripping from each syllable. Judge Anderson banged the gavel once.
Mr. Marcus, this is not theater.
Present your evidence properly when the time comes. Marcus smirked, but he bowed slightly.
Of course, Your Honor.
David's chest rose and fell heavily. He felt the eyes of the room boring into him, branding him as guilty before he had even spoken. His heart raced, not because Marcus's words were true, but because Marcus was clever enough to twist half-truths into daggers. When it was David's turn, he rose slowly. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled just out of sight. Your Honor, I have never sabotaged Marcus. He's lying because he's afraid that I know what he's really been doing. Afraid that the truth will come out.
The courtroom stirred again.
Marcus laughed bitterly. Listen to him, paranoid, desperate. That's what happens when you play games you don't understand, David.
You get burned.
David's gaze locked on Marcus. You can humiliate me all you want. But when I speak, when I tell this court the truth, you won't be the one laughing. Elena finally looked up at her brother, her eyes wide with fear. She wanted to believe him, but Marcus had always been so convincing. What if David was wrong? What if exposing Marcus tore her life apart even more? The tension was unbearable. Judge Anderson raised his gavel again. We will hear both sides fully. But let me remind you, this is a court of truth, not ego. Save your dramatics for the evidence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smiling as though he had already won. David sat down, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. He knew the battle had just begun. And yet, in the shadows of his mind, David carried something Marcus didn't expect. Something he hadn't revealed yet. A secret that could destroy Marcus completely. The courtroom doors creaked open at that very moment. A man entered quietly, carrying a thick brown envelope. He walked straight toward David's lawyer and whispered something before handing it over. Marcus's confident grin faltered for the first time. Whatever was in that envelope, he hadn't prepared for it. The envelope lay on the defense table like a ticking bomb. Its rough edges and worn paper seemed almost too ordinary for the weight it carried, yet every eye in the courtroom followed it as if it glowed. David's lawyer, Miss Carter, a calm but razor-sharp attorney known for her precision, slid the envelope toward her without breaking eye contact with Marcus. The subtle smile on her lips betrayed her confidence. Marcus leaned forward, his smirk returning. What is this now, some last-minute trick? His voice carried across the silent room, mocking and dismissive. Judge Anderson adjusted his glasses. Miss Carter, do you intend to submit new evidence? Yes, Your Honor, she replied smoothly. This just came into our possession. It directly concerns Mr. Marcus's credibility. Marcus's jaw tightened, though he kept his outward composure.
He forced a laugh.
Credibility?
Really?
That's your strategy? My wife's little brother throws tantrums, and now his lawyer waves around envelopes like a magician? This is laughable. But the laughter didn't reach his eyes. David sat frozen, watching every flicker of Marcus's face. He could tell, Marcus knew what might be inside. His swagger cracked for just a second, and David felt a small rush of vindication. Miss Carter opened the envelope deliberately, letting the silence stretch. She pulled out a stack of photographs, thick enough to make the jurors lean forward instinctively. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but edged with gravity, "these are dated photographs showing Mr. Marcus in meetings with representatives of Phoenix Global Investments." The name alone sent murmurs rippling across the room. Everyone knew Phoenix Global's reputation: aggressive buyouts, predatory contracts, and whispered allegations of fraud. Marcus's face hardened. "This is irrelevant. Business meetings are not a crime." "Not a crime," Miss Carter countered, holding one of the photographs high, "but a conflict of interest." Mr. Marcus assured his partners he was acting solely on their behalf. "These images prove otherwise." Judge Anderson frowned, tapping his gavel lightly. "We'll allow the jury to review them." "Continue." Elena's eyes darted between her husband and her brother, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Marcus, what is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't answer her. He couldn't afford to. Instead, he leaned into his lawyer, whispering furiously. His attorney, a slick man with silver hair, shook his head in frustration, clearly caught off guard. David finally spoke, his voice steady. "This is just the beginning. He tried to humiliate me, make me look like a liar, but Marcus is the one living two lives. And now everyone's going to see it." Judge Anderson gestured toward Marcus's side. "Mr. Williams, do you have an immediate response?" Marcus stood, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. His smile returned, though thinner now, less genuine. "Your Honor, this is a distraction. My brother-in-law is trying to muddy the waters with half-truths and meaningless photographs. So what if I met with Phoenix Global? Meetings don't prove misconduct. This is all smoke and mirrors." He turned toward the jury, spreading his hands theatrically. "Ask yourselves, who are you more likely to believe? A respected businessman with a proven record? Or a reckless, unemployed kid desperate to tear me down out of jealousy?" His words dripped with poison, and for a moment, it seemed some of the jurors nodded slightly. But Miss Carter wasn't finished. She slid out the final piece from the envelope, a USB drive. She held it up between her fingers like it was a blade. "And what about this, Mr. Marcus?" she said, her tone almost too calm. "Shall we play the recordings of those meetings for the court? Recordings where you promised Phoenix Global access to confidential information in exchange for personal gain." The color drained from Marcus's face. Elena gasped, covering her mouth. David leaned forward, his eyes locked on Marcus, every muscle in his body coiled with anticipation. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice faltered. For the first time since the trial began, his confidence cracked audibly. Judge Anderson raised his hand. "We'll recess briefly to review this new evidence." He banged the gavel. Court adjourned until 2 p.m. The room exploded into murmurs. Reporters scribbled frantically, jurors whispered to each other, and Elena stared at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. David stood slowly, his heart pounding. He had survived Marcus's opening attack. But he knew this war was far from over. Marcus turned toward him as the bailiff called order. His eyes were no longer smug, they were sharp, dangerous. He leaned close enough for only David to hear.
"You think you've won?" he hissed.
"You have no idea what I'm capable of. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you never opened that envelope." David didn't flinch. He whispered back, "Then bring it. Because I'm just getting started." As the courtroom emptied, Elena approached David with tears in her eyes. "David," she whispered, gripping his arm, "if what's in those recordings is true, then my husband has been lying to me for years." But before David could answer, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and paled. Whoever was calling, it wasn't just business, it was someone who held the other half of his darkest secret. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the tall courthouse windows when the gavel struck again. The courtroom was packed tighter than before. Word of the mysterious photographs and recordings had spread through town like wildfire. Journalists filled the back rows, their pens ready, their cameras poised. David sat at the defense table, his fingers drumming nervously on the polished wood. He had survived the morning, but his mind buzzed with questions. What exactly was on that USB? Had Marcus's mask finally slipped enough for everyone to see the truth? Marcus entered moments later, his confidence carefully stitched back into place. He straightened his expensive tie, forced a smirk, and brushed an affectionate hand against Elena's arm as if nothing had happened. But Elena pulled back, her expression clouded with doubt. The small gesture was enough to make the room hum with whispers. Judge Anderson called order. Ms. Carter, the court has reviewed your submitted evidence. You may proceed. Ms. Carter rose, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She approached the evidence screen, USB in hand. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to play excerpts from the recordings obtained lawfully through a whistleblower associated with Phoenix Global. Marcus's lawyer shot to his feet.
Objection.
These are unverifiable, potentially fabricated. Judge Anderson raised a hand. The court has already reviewed preliminary authenticity. Objection overruled.
Proceed.
A hush fell over the courtroom as the first audio clip played. A grainy voice filled the room, but it was unmistakably Marcus. Gentlemen, you'll have the full client list by next quarter. In return, I expect the payment wired discreetly. My current partners won't know a thing. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. David closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of vindication sinking in. The recording continued. And don't worry about my wife's brother. He's a nuisance, but I'll handle him. He doesn't know when to keep quiet.
All eyes shot toward David.
Marcus's words echoed like a dagger twisting in the air. The judge's gavel cracked. Quiet in the court. Marcus's lawyer scrambled. Your Honor, this could be taken out of context. Ms. Carter cut in smoothly.
Out of context?
We have 5 separate recordings spanning 3 months, all consistent. Mr. Marcus sold confidential information, betrayed his partners, and plotted to silence the very person who tried to stop him, David. The jury whispered among themselves, their faces shifting with shock and unease. Marcus slammed his palm on the table, his mask breaking at last.
This is a setup.
This is his doing. He jabbed a finger at David, his voice trembling with fury. He's jealous, bitter, desperate to ruin me. None of this means anything. But his words sounded weaker now, more frantic. Elena's voice rang out from the front row, trembling but firm. Marcus, is it true? Did you really say those things? For a heartbeat, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Marcus turned to her, his eyes flashing, but he didn't answer. His silence was louder than any denial. David stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He faced Marcus directly, his voice quiet but steady. You tried to humiliate me. You called me a boy, said I was jealous. But the truth is, you were scared. Scared I'd find out what you were hiding. Marcus's fists clenched, his knuckles white. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, David shot back, his voice growing stronger.
And so does this court.
This is only the beginning. Because there's one more piece of evidence, one that even you didn't expect.
Gasps erupted again.
Marcus's lawyer tugged at his sleeve, whispering frantically, but Marcus couldn't stop himself.
You little snake, he spat.
You think you've won because of a few recordings? You don't even know the game you've stepped into. I'll bury you, David. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. Judge Anderson slammed the gavel down again. Mr. Marcus. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. But Marcus barely heard him. His fury boiled over, and for the first time, the jury saw not a confident businessman, but a desperate, cornered man lashing out. As the tension simmered, Ms. Carter calmly placed a sealed document on the table. This, Your Honor, is a sworn affidavit from one of Marcus's own clients. It details payments, dates, and the names of the executives at Phoenix Global he colluded with. Marcus's face drained of color. David leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had waited so long for this moment, for Marcus's empire of lies to begin collapsing. But just as the judge reached for the document, a loud commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A tall man in a dark coat stormed inside, ignoring the bailiff's protests. His face was shadowed, but his voice was commanding. Stop this trial right now. I have information that changes everything. The entire courtroom turned, stunned. And Marcus? Marcus smiled again, as if salvation had just walked through the door. The courtroom froze as the tall man in the dark coat strode to the front. His boots echoed against the marble floor, and the hush of the gallery was so complete that even the flicker of fluorescent lights seemed loud. The bailiff extended an arm trying to block him, but the man brushed past with a wave of authority that made everyone hesitate. Judge Anderson's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you cannot simply storm into my courtroom. Identify yourself immediately." The man removed his hat, revealing sharp features lined with age and stress. His salt and pepper beard gave him an air of hard-earned wisdom, and his piercing eyes seemed to sweep over everyone before landing squarely on Marcus. "My name," he said, his voice low but resonant, "is Richard Hale. Former senior executive at Phoenix Global."
A ripple of shock swept through the courtroom.
Reporters scrambled to jot down notes.
Jurors leaned forward.
Elena gasped, recognizing the name. Marcus had mentioned Hale in hushed tones before, always with a mixture of respect and caution. Richard's gaze cut through the air like a blade. "And I'm here because your plaintiff, Mr. Marcus Williams, isn't just guilty of betraying his partners. He's guilty of betraying me. And I have the proof." Marcus surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. He has no standing here." His voice cracked as he spoke, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Judge Anderson held up his hand. "Mr. Hale, if you wish to testify, you will do so under oath and under the proper rules. Bailiff, please escort him to the witness stand." The room stirred with electricity as Richard Hale walked confidently to the stand, placing his hand on the Bible and swearing the oath. David leaned forward, his pulse quickening. He hadn't expected this, but something told him fate had just dealt Marcus a devastating blow. Miss Carter approached, her composure unshaken. "Mr. Hale, you claim to have information relevant to this case. Please explain to the court." Richard's voice carried the weight of betrayal. 2 years ago, Phoenix Global initiated a series of confidential negotiations. Mr. Marcus Williams was contracted to represent outside interests. Instead, he funneled our proprietary data to competitors in exchange for personal kickbacks. We discovered forged signatures, hidden accounts, and falsified reports, all leading back to him. He reached into his coat and produced a thick binder. "This," he said, placing it on the table, "is a complete record. Emails, contracts, wire transfers. Every lie he told, every dollar he stole. Not just from clients, but from his own wife and her family." Elena's knees buckled. She clutched the edge of the bench to steady herself, her face pale as tears welled in her eyes. "Marcus, tell me he's lying," she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus's jaw worked furiously, but no words came.
The jury sat stunned.
The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hale, are you prepared to submit these documents to the court as evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," Richard said firmly. "And I'm willing to testify under penalty of perjury." Marcus's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this man is clearly biased. He was fired from Phoenix Global, wasn't he? This is revenge, nothing more."
Richard's eyes hardened. "I resigned.
"And I resigned because I refused to be complicit in Marcus's schemes." The room buzzed with whispers again. David turned toward Marcus, his voice steady but filled with fire. "You thought you could humiliate me. You thought you could make me look small. But you've been exposed, Marcus. Not just by me, by the very people you betrayed." Marcus slammed his fist against the table, his mask of charm and arrogance shattering completely. "You think this ends me? You think a few documents and a bitter ex-executive can take me down? You don't know who I am. I have friends in places you can't even imagine." His voice cracked into a snarl.
"And if I fall?
I'll take all of you with me." Judge Anderson's gavel thundered down. "Mr. Marcus, you will remain silent unless called upon. Do I make myself clear?" Marcus collapsed back into his chair, his chest heaving. The once proud businessman now looked cornered, frantic. Richard Hale, however, remained calm, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "You built your empire on lies," he said. "And today in this courtroom, those lies come crashing down." Just as Judge Anderson ordered the documents to be submitted, Marcus's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and his face went pale.
This time, he didn't smirk. He didn't sneer.
He simply stared at the screen, his hand trembling. Whatever message he'd just received, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And Marcus knew, the worst was yet to come. Marcus stared at his phone as if it were a weapon pointed at his chest. His hand trembled, knuckles white around the sleek device. For the first time in years, his arrogance seemed to drain away, leaving only raw fear. Judge Anderson noticed the shift. "Mr. Williams," he barked, "if you cannot control yourself, the court will confiscate that phone. Put it away immediately." But Marcus didn't move. His eyes darted to the gallery, scanning the faces as though someone, some unseen hand, was watching him. Finally, he shoved the phone into his pocket, forcing composure, though sweat glistened on his brow. David leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Who's pulling your strings now, Marcus?" Marcus shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass.
"Careful, boy," he hissed.
"You're playing with fire you can't control." Richard Hale remained steady in the witness box, his presence a shadow over Marcus's crumbling facade.
Miss Carter pressed forward.
"Mr. Hale, these documents, do they directly implicate Marcus Williams in fraudulent activity?" "Yes," Richard answered firmly.
"Not just fraud. Bribery. Misuse of confidential data. Wire fraud.
Enough to destroy his credibility in any court." The jury scribbled notes furiously. The tension was palpable, like the room itself was holding its breath. But Marcus's lawyer stood quickly, desperate to regain control. "Your Honor, this so-called testimony is speculative. We have no way of verifying Mr. Hale's claims in this courtroom today."
Judge Anderson frowned, then nodded.
"The documents will be authenticated by experts. Until then, the jury may consider them conditionally. Proceed, Ms. Carter."
David's pulse pounded.
He had dreamed of this moment, watching Marcus's empire collapse, but part of him knew this was only one layer. Marcus wasn't just arrogant, he was cunning, connected. And whatever had rattled him on that phone wasn't ordinary. At recess, as the courtroom emptied into the hallway, Elena grabbed David's arm. Tears streaked her face. "David, I don't know what to believe anymore. I married him because I thought he was strong, stable. Now I feel like I've been living with a stranger." David placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady but pained. "You've been living with a liar. And it's time everyone sees the truth." Before Elena could answer, Marcus approached. His voice was low, venomous.
"You're making a mistake, Elena."
"You think your brother's a hero? He's dragging this family's name through the mud. And when the dust settles, I'll still be standing." Elena recoiled, shaking her head.
"Don't talk to me like that. Not anymore."
Marcus's jaw clenched, but before he could reply, the tall figure of Richard Hale stepped between them. His voice was quiet but firm.
"Marcus, you're cornered."
"Don't make this worse than it already is." Marcus's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You have no idea what worse looks like." Back inside the courtroom, the judge prepared to resume. But before the proceedings could continue, Ms. Carter requested the recordings from the USB be played in full. The audio filled the courtroom once more. Marcus's voice: "Transfer it quietly, no paper trail. And make sure David doesn't talk. He's too nosy for his own good." The gallery erupted again. David's chest tightened as his name echoed through the speakers, proof that Marcus had always seen him as a threat. Marcus slammed his hand on the table.
"That's edited."
He spliced it together. His voice cracked with panic. But Ms. Carter calmly held up the authenticated transcript. "This is a verbatim copy of the recording, Your Honor. It has been verified." The judge's gavel thundered. "Mr. Williams, another outburst and I will hold you in contempt."
"Sit down."
Marcus sank into his chair, but his eyes flicked toward his phone again, restless, haunted. Then, as the final recording ended, a shadow of realization swept across David. Marcus wasn't just afraid of the evidence. He was afraid of who else was involved. And that fear, David realized, meant something darker lurked beyond the courtroom walls. Suddenly, Marcus's lawyer stood, pale-faced. He handed a folded note to the judge, whispering urgently. Judge Anderson's expression darkened as he read it. "This court will recess again, immediately," he declared, his voice heavy. David's heart dropped. Because in that moment, Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile, as if the mysterious message had just turned the tide back in his favor. The gavel's strike rang like thunder. "Court is in recess," Judge Anderson declared, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding the jury as he tucked the folded note into his robes. Confusion rippled through the gallery. The jurors whispered, shifting uneasily. Reporters craned their necks, eager to see what had just shifted the atmosphere from tense to dangerous. David's stomach knotted. He glanced at Miss Carter, who frowned, tapping her pen against the desk. Even she didn't know what the note contained, and that was a problem. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his confidence slithering back into place like a snake returning to its coil. His smirk was back, faint but unmistakable. He mouthed a single word across the aisle toward David. "Checkmate." As the judge exited through his chamber door, the bailiff ordered everyone to clear the courtroom. David walked out beside his sister Elena, who looked pale and shaken. What does this mean? She whispered, gripping his arm tightly. What could have been in that note? David shook his head.
I don't know.
But whatever it is, Marcus was expecting it. Behind them, Marcus followed at a leisurely pace, phone in hand, typing rapidly with his thumb. His lawyer trailed close, whispering urgently, but Marcus brushed him off. Richard Hale caught up to David. Don't let this rattle you, he said in a low voice. I've seen this before. When men like Marcus are cornered, they call in favors.
Pull strings. David glanced at him.
Favors from who?
Richard's expression darkened.
People you don't want to owe. People who make evidence disappear. The courthouse hallway buzzed with murmurs. Journalists swarmed, shoving microphones in every direction, hungry for scraps of information. One reporter shouted, Mr. Williams, are you worried about Phoenix Global's retaliation?
Another pressed forward.
David, is it true Marcus threatened you directly? David didn't answer, but the questions gnawed at him.
Retaliation. Threats. Phoenix Global. How deep did this go?
Then, like a blade slicing through the noise, Marcus's voice cut across the hall. Ask my dear brother-in-law how he plans to explain his own secrets. Because I promise you, he has plenty.
Cameras flashed.
Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus smiled like a showman, knowing he had just planted a seed of doubt. Later, in the quiet of the waiting room, Elena confronted him. Her voice cracked as she spoke. David, is there any truth to what he just said? Do you have secrets he could use against you?
David froze.
For a moment, the air seemed to thicken.
Elena, you know me.
I would never betray you. But he sounded so certain, she whispered. And if he drags you down with him? David clenched his fists.
He's bluffing.
He has nothing on me. But deep down, a shadow of doubt flickered. Marcus was manipulative, yes, but he was also ruthless. And men like him didn't bluff without reason. Back in the judge's chambers, whispers spread quickly that the mysterious note wasn't trivial. Word leaked to the attorneys. The note contained a warning. Someone had threatened the court itself if the trial continued. The phrase was chillingly clear, drop the case or the truth dies with you. Judge Anderson returned to the courtroom after nearly an hour, his face grim. He addressed the room directly. This court has received an anonymous threat. Proceedings will continue under increased security. But let it be clear, intimidation will not sway justice here. Gasps filled the gallery. The bailiff shifted, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Marcus sat perfectly still, his smile faint but poisonous. He thrived on the chaos, on the fear. David leaned forward, locking eyes with him. You think this makes you untouchable. But all it proves is how desperate you are. Marcus whispered back, just loud enough for David to hear. You still don't get it. This isn't just my fight anymore. There are bigger players now. And they'd rather see you destroyed than let the truth come out. As the gavel signaled the court back into session, the doors creaked open again. This time, it wasn't Richard Hale, or a stranger. It was a woman. Her face pale, her hands trembling, clutching a folder to her chest. She stepped forward, eyes fixed on Marcus. And David realized instantly. She knew something. Something that could either save him, or bury them all. The woman's heels clicked against the courtroom floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Her hands trembled as she clutched the folder to her chest, but her eyes, sharp, wet with emotion, never left Marcus. State your name for the record, Judge Anderson said, his voice measured but wary. She swallowed hard before speaking. My name is Clara Whitmore. I used to work for Marcus Williams. The gallery erupted. Murmurs filled the air as people turned toward one another, whispering like waves of fire spreading across a dry field. Marcus froze, his face draining of color. This is ridiculous, he snapped, his voice sharp. She's a disgruntled ex-employee. She was fired for incompetence. Clara's voice wavered, but she stood firm. No. I quit. And I quit because I couldn't watch him ruin people's lives anymore. Ms. Carter stepped forward, seizing the moment. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to question the witness. Judge Anderson nodded. Proceed. Clara opened the folder with shaking fingers. Inside were documents, carefully organized and marked with dates and signatures. She held them out for Ms. Carter. These, Clara said, are internal memos, email exchanges, and payment ledgers. Marcus used me as his assistant to file them under fake names, but I made copies. I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. David leaned forward, his breath catching. Could this be the missing piece? Marcus slammed his fist on the table.
This is absurd.
She's lying. You can't allow fabricated papers to poison the jury. But Clara's voice rose, trembling yet forceful. I saw you take money from Phoenix Global. I saw you hide transfers meant to fund their illegal buyouts. And I saw the way you talked about David, how you said you'd crush him if he ever got too close to the truth. Her words cracked through the silence like thunder. Elena gasped audibly, clutching her chest. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she turned, staring at her husband like he was a stranger. Miss Carter displayed the papers to the court. Your Honor, these documents confirm the whistleblower recordings and Mr. Hale's testimony. Together, they form a pattern of corruption, manipulation, and fraud directly tied to Marcus Williams. The jury scribbled furiously, their faces tight with focus. For the first time, Marcus's confidence seemed to crumble completely. His leg bounced under the table, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like stone. But then suddenly, his lips curled into a thin smile. Careful, Clara, Marcus said softly, his tone dripping with venom. You know what happens to people who betray me. The room went silent. Judge Anderson's gavel crashed down. Mr. Williams. Threatening a witness in my courtroom will not be tolerated.
But Clara didn't flinch. Her voice steadied.
I'm not afraid of you anymore. Not after what you did to me. Not after what you did to her.
She turned sharply toward Elena. The air shattered. Elena's voice cracked.
What do you mean, what he did to me? Clara hesitated, her eyes full of pity. I wasn't going to say it. I thought it wasn't my place.
But Elena.
Marcus has been lying to you about more than money. About more than business.
He's been.
Marcus shot to his feet, shouting over her. Enough.
The courtroom burst into chaos.
The bailiffs rushed forward, restraining him as the judge shouted for order. The jury recoiled in shock, while David's blood ran cold. Elena's face went white as a sheet. She gripped the wooden bench, swaying as if her world had just tilted on its axis. Clara's voice cut through the noise, trembling but unstoppable. He's been unfaithful, Elena.
4 years.
And I have the proof right here. She held up a photograph from the folder. Elena's scream pierced the courtroom as the picture slipped from Clara's hands and floated to the floor. A picture of Marcus in the arms of another woman. Elena's scream echoed through the courtroom, raw and broken. The photograph slipped from Clara's hand, landing face up on the polished wood floor. For a moment, no one moved. The image spoke louder than words. There was Marcus, smirking in a hotel suite, glass of champagne in hand, an unfamiliar woman clinging to his arm. His charm, once intoxicating, was now evidence. Elena staggered to her feet. Her knees buckled, and David caught her just before she collapsed. Her tears soaked into his shoulder as she whispered, I defended him, all these years, and this is what he was hiding. David's jaw tightened, his rage boiling, but he held her steady, his voice gentle. You don't have to defend him anymore. The gallery buzzed like a hornet's nest. Jurors covered their mouths, whispering furiously. Reporters scribbled as though every second might become a headline. Judge Anderson's gavel pounded, demanding order. Quiet. Quiet in the court. But even as silence fell, Marcus's voice broke through, sharp and venomous. It's nothing. A meaningless photo. You're all fools if you think this proves anything. Clara's voice cracked, but she didn't falter. It wasn't meaningless. She wasn't the only one. There were others. And every time, he used company funds, stolen funds, to cover his tracks. Elena's sob turned into a sharp gasp. Her entire body trembled as she stared at her husband. Is it true? Were there others? Marcus tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow, desperate. Elena, you know how enemies work. They fabricate stories, stage photos. Answer me. She screamed, her voice slicing through the courtroom. For the first time, Marcus didn't respond. His silence was louder than any confession. David stepped forward, his fists clenched. You humiliated me, Marcus. You mocked me. But the truth is, you've been humiliating her for years. Marcus's glare snapped to David, pure hatred burning in his eyes. You think you're a hero? You think this wins you anything? You're nothing, David. A parasite living off scraps, desperate for attention. David didn't flinch. No. I'm a brother protecting his sister. Something you never understood. The words cut Marcus deeper than any evidence. For a flicker of a moment, his face cracked, showing the rot beneath the arrogance. Judge Anderson cleared his throat, his voice heavy with gravity. This court has now seen financial records, recordings, corroborating testimony, and photographic evidence of Mr. Williams's misconduct. We will allow further authentication, but the pattern is clear. Marcus's lawyer stood, his face pale. Your Honor, this entire proceeding has turned into a circus of accusations. Enough, the judge interrupted, pounding the gavel. If your client wishes to salvage what remains of his credibility, I suggest he remain silent until called upon. The courtroom seemed to tremble under the weight of truth. Elena sat again, her shoulders shaking as David kept a steadying hand on her back. Clara's hands finally stopped trembling as she lowered the rest of her documents onto the table. But Marcus leaned back in his chair, a strange, unsettling calm settling over him. Slowly, he pulled his phone from his pocket. He typed something quickly, his eyes never leaving David's. A faint smile touched his lips, not smug this time, but cold, calculated. David caught the look and felt a chill crawl down his spine. Whatever Marcus was planning, it wasn't over. Just as Judge Anderson announced a short recess, Marcus's phone buzzed again. He looked at the message and let out a low chuckle. He leaned forward, whispering so only David could hear. You think you've destroyed me? You've only pulled at one thread. When the rest unravels, you'll wish you'd never started this. And before David could respond, Marcus tapped his screen, sending a message that would set in motion the next devastating twist. The short recess brought no relief. The courtroom emptied into the marble hallways, buzzing like a hive. Jurors whispered among themselves, journalists rushed to file breaking updates, and Elena sat slumped on a bench, her face buried in her hands. David stayed close, one arm around her shoulders. You're stronger than this, Lena, he whispered. He can't break you anymore. But Elena shook her head, her voice muffled. It wasn't just betrayal, David. It was my whole life. Everything I thought was safe, solid, it was all a lie. David's heart twisted, but he kept his jaw tight. He couldn't afford to break now. Not when Marcus was still out there, plotting. Marcus stood a few feet away, phone in hand, texting rapidly. His lawyer hovered close, whispering urgently, but Marcus brushed him off with a dismissive wave. His lips curved into a smirk, but this time it wasn't arrogance, it was the satisfaction of someone who had just set a trap. Richard Hale noticed. He stepped closer to David, lowering his voice. He's moving pieces we can't see. That phone of his, it's more dangerous than the lies we've exposed.
David frowned. What do you mean?
I mean, Richard said grimly, Marcus isn't fighting just for himself anymore. Whoever's backing him, they don't care about him, they care about silencing us. Moments later, court reconvened. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Judge Anderson looked weary, but resolute. Proceedings will continue, he said firmly. But given the threats made to this court and the escalating tension, security has been doubled. No intimidation will derail justice. The bailiffs, now positioned at every corner, scanned the room with sharp eyes.
Ms. Carter rose.
Your Honor, we'd like to present one final exhibit, financial records tracing wire transfers from Phoenix Global directly to Mr. Williams's offshore accounts. She placed a thick binder on the evidence table. But before she could continue, Marcus stood abruptly. His voice was loud, commanding, almost theatrical. Your Honor, before this farce goes any further, I demand that the defense explain something. If David is so innocent, why was his name tied to those same accounts?
The room erupted.
Gasps, whispers, confusion. Elena looked up, her face streaked with tears, staring at her brother in shock.
David froze. What?
Marcus's smile widened, venomous.
Oh yes.
Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think you could meddle in my affairs without leaving fingerprints? You're no saint, David. You're just another liar, just like me. Ms. Carter slammed a hand on the table.
Objection.
Baseless accusation. But Marcus cut her off, holding up his phone.
Baseless?
Or shall I share with the court the transfer logs I just received?
David's name. His signature. His involvement.
All there for the world to see. The judge's gavel pounded furiously.
Order. Order.
But the gallery was already in chaos, reporters shouting, jurors whispering. Elena turned to David, her face pale as death. David, tell me it isn't true. David's mouth went dry. He wanted to shout, to deny it outright, but the trap Marcus had set was clear. Someone had forged his name, tied him to Marcus's crimes. And now, in front of everyone, it looked damning. Richard Hale leaned close, whispering sharply. Don't panic. He's manufacturing evidence. But the jury doesn't know that yet. You need to stay calm, if you break he wins. David nodded stiffly, his pulse hammering in his ears.
But inside, fear clawed at him.
Marcus had found a way to drag him into the mud, and if he couldn't prove his innocence quickly, everything could collapse. Judge Anderson leaned forward, his voice heavy with authority. In light of these new claims, this court will demand verification of Mr. Marcus's evidence. Until then, both sides are ordered to prepare for cross-examination.
The gavel slammed down. David's chest tightened.
Marcus had turned the spotlight onto him. And now, the next round wasn't about Marcus being guilty. It was about David proving he wasn't. The gavel's strike still echoed in David's ears long after Judge Anderson dismissed the room.
His chest felt tight, his breath shallow.
Marcus had managed to flip the spotlight, and now half the jury looked at him with doubt instead of sympathy. Elena sat in silence beside him, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She whispered, almost afraid of the words.
"David, you didn't, right?
You had nothing to do with those accounts." David's voice cracked but stayed firm. "Lena, I swear to you, I've never touched Marcus's money. He's setting me up. He forged my name, just like he forges everything else." But Elena's silence cut him deeper than Marcus's accusations. In the corner, Marcus leaned casually against the wall, phone in hand. His lips curled into that familiar smirk. Every flick of his thumb across the screen looked like another chess move in a game only he seemed to understand. Richard Hale stepped closer to David, his voice low but urgent.
"Listen to me. He's not invincible.
If he forged those documents, there will be discrepancies.
Dates, metadata, signatures.
We just need time to expose it." David clenched his fists. But the jury doesn't see time. They see a headline, "Brother-in-law tied to corruption. By tomorrow, I'll be guilty in their eyes." Richard's gaze hardened. "Then we turn his trick against him. If Marcus wants to play dirty, we dig deeper. We show them his fingerprints on the forgery." When court reconvened, Marcus wasted no time. He strutted to the stand, confidence dripping from every step. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "I've just submitted evidence linking David directly to offshore accounts. Here are the logs, transfers, even digital signatures." He handed over printed documents, neat and damning. Ms. Carter rose instantly.
"Objection, Your Honor.
These documents require authentication. The timing of their appearance is suspicious."
Judge Anderson nodded. "They will be authenticated.
Until then, the jury will treat them cautiously.
Continue."
Marcus turned toward the jury, lowering his voice to something more intimate. "Ladies and gentlemen, isn't it convenient? Just as my so-called crimes come to light, my brother-in-law magically appears with evidence against me. And now, suddenly, he's entangled in the same accounts. Ask yourself, was he protecting the truth? Or was he protecting himself?" The gallery buzzed with gasps and whispers. David rose to his feet. His voice wasn't polished like Marcus's, but it was raw, steady, filled with fire. "You want the truth," he said, his eyes locked on the jury. "Marcus forged those documents, just like he's forged every part of his life. He's a liar, a cheater, a fraud. And if you give us time, we'll prove it. Not with stories, not with accusations, but with facts he can't erase." Marcus laughed, mocking, but David pressed on. He thinks he's clever, hiding behind money and connections. But the truth has a way of crawling out of the dark. And when it does, no amount of forged paper will save him.
The courtroom went silent.
For the first time, David felt the jury's eyes soften, not fully convinced but curious.
Waiting.
Judge Anderson cleared his throat. "Cross-examination will begin tomorrow. Both sides are to prepare their arguments and submit any evidence for review tonight."
Court adjourned. The gavel slammed down.
As the room emptied, Marcus brushed past David, leaning in close, his whisper dripping venom. "You're cornered now. By tomorrow the jury won't see a victim. They'll see you for what you are, weak, desperate, guilty."
David's jaw tightened.
He whispered back, "And by tomorrow they'll see you for what you are, finished." Marcus's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. That night, in the dim glow of his lawyer's office, David and Ms. Carter pored over the evidence Marcus had submitted. And there it was, barely visible, buried deep in the metadata.
A timestamp. A digital fingerprint. Not David's. Marcus's.
The office lights hummed softly above as David, Ms. Carter, and Richard Hale leaned over the laptop. The evidence Marcus had paraded in court glowed on the screen. Neat bank logs, polished signatures, convincing timestamps. Convincing, until Ms. Carter zoomed in. "There," she whispered, pointing to the corner of the document's metadata.
The editing tag.
Whoever created this file used a different software build than the bank system. And look, see the author field.
David squinted.
A name flickered faintly across the screen. M. Williams _92.
His chest tightened. He was careless.
He left his own digital fingerprint. Richard chuckled darkly.
Classic Marcus.
Too arrogant to double-check his own forgery. Miss Carter's lips curved into a thin smile. This is enough to dismantle his claim. If we present it right, we won't just prove the evidence is fake, we'll prove Marcus fabricated it himself. David exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. But beneath the relief, anger simmered. Marcus had tried to destroy him with lies, and nearly succeeded.
Tomorrow, it was his turn.
The next morning, the courtroom was electric. Every seat was filled, journalists spilling into the aisles, cameras clicking like gunfire. The tension wasn't just high, it was combustible. Judge Anderson entered, his face set in stone. We will resume cross-examination. The defense may proceed. Miss Carter stood, calm and razor-sharp. Your Honor, before cross-examining Mr. Williams, the defense would like to revisit the documents he submitted yesterday. She gestured, and the courtroom screen lit up with the so-called transfer logs. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smug again. But his smirk faltered when Miss Carter enlarged the metadata fields. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, turning to the jury, these documents are not authentic.
They were fabricated.
And the proof is in the metadata. The author field shows the creator of these files.
Not David. Not the bank.
But Marcus Williams himself. Gasps exploded across the courtroom. Marcus shot to his feet. That's a lie. You doctored that. Judge Anderson slammed the gavel. Sit down, Mr. Williams. But Miss Carter wasn't finished.
She tapped the screen again.
Additionally, the timestamps show these files were created after Mr. Williams received notice of this trial.
He didn't discover them.
He manufactured them, in a desperate attempt to frame his brother-in-law. The jury's faces hardened, their pens scribbling furiously. Elena, her eyes red but sharper now, turned to her husband with a look of pure betrayal. You tried to ruin my brother, she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus's face contorted, rage twisting every feature. He deserves it. He's been against me from the start. I had to destroy him before he destroyed me. The outburst rang through the courtroom, echoing like a confession. Judge Anderson pounded the gavel again, his voice thundering.
Mr. Williams.
One more interruption and I will hold you in contempt.
But it was too late.
The jury had seen him lose control. David rose slowly, his voice calm but cutting. You wanted to humiliate me, Marcus. To paint me as small, jealous, pathetic. But today, everyone here sees who you really are.
A liar. A cheat.
A man so desperate to protect his empire that you destroy your own family. Marcus's eyes blazed. I built this family. You're nothing but a leech. Without me, your sister would have nothing. Elena stood then, her voice trembling but firm.
No, Marcus.
Without you, I'd finally have the truth. The gallery gasped, the moment sharp as a knife. Judge Anderson leaned forward, his voice grave. This court has seen more than enough to question Mr. Williams's credibility. But before I render judgment, the defense may call one final witness. Miss Carter nodded, her eyes glinting. We already have, Your Honor. He's here today.
The courtroom doors swung open.
And a familiar figure walked in, carrying yet another envelope. Marcus's face drained of all color. The courtroom doors creaked open, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the silent chamber.
Every head turned.
It was the same man who had delivered the first envelope on day one, the quiet courier with no name, no presence, just duty. But this time, he carried not one, but two envelopes, sealed and stamped with the emblem of Phoenix Global's Internal Compliance Board. Judge Anderson's brow furrowed.
Approach the bench.
The courier stepped forward, handed the envelopes over, and departed without a word. The judge examined the seals, broke them, and scanned the contents. His face hardened with every page. Finally, he looked up. The documents confirm everything presented in this trial. Phoenix Global itself has filed official complaints against Mr. Williams for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. These are corroborated by their own audit records. The gallery erupted in gasps, the reporters nearly climbing over each other to capture the moment. Marcus shot to his feet, his mask completely gone.
No. This is a setup.
They're turning on me because I outsmarted them. None of this is real. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but Marcus ripped away from him, his voice cracking with rage.
You fools don't understand. I built this.
I kept them all rich. And now they throw me to the wolves because of him. He jabbed a finger at David, spittle flying. A boy with nothing, who dared to challenge me. David stood slowly, his voice steady, quiet, but carrying through the room.
No, Marcus. Not just me. Everyone you betrayed.
Everyone you thought was too weak, too afraid to fight back. Elena rose beside him, her tears dried, her voice trembling but resolute.
You humiliated me.
You lied to me. You tried to destroy my brother. But today, you destroyed yourself. Her words hit harder than any evidence. Marcus staggered back as though struck. Judge Anderson's gavel cracked like thunder.
Order.
This court finds that Marcus Williams deliberately fabricated evidence, committed fraud, and attempted to frame his brother-in-law. All fraudulent claims against David Williams are hereby dismissed. He turned sharply toward Marcus. And this court will be forwarding charges for perjury, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to the proper authorities. Mr. Williams, you are hereby remanded into custody. The bailiffs moved in. Marcus thrashed, his voice breaking into a desperate roar.
No.
You can't do this to me.
I'll take you all down.
His words were cut short as the bailiffs forced him into handcuffs. His eyes, wild and bloodshot, locked on David one final time. This isn't over.
Do you hear me?
This isn't over. But for the first time, his threats rang hollow. The courtroom erupted into noise, reporters shouting questions, jurors whispering, spectators buzzing. But David didn't hear any of it. He only felt Elena's hand slip into his, trembling but warm. Her eyes brimmed with gratitude and sorrow all at once.
Thank you, she whispered. For not giving up on me.
For fighting for the truth. David squeezed her hand gently, his own eyes damp.
Always, Lena.
That's what family does. Across the room, Clara and Richard Hale exchanged nods with David, silent allies bound by the same fight. The storm had passed, but its echoes would linger. As Marcus was dragged out, his empire shattered, David felt a strange calm wash over him. The humiliation, the lies, the threats, they had all led to this moment. The moment where truth had triumphed over arrogance. The moment where a brother's love had defeated a tyrant's pride. Just as the courtroom began to clear, David's phone buzzed in his pocket.
He glanced at the screen. An unknown number. A single message.
Marcus was never the only one. Be careful who you trust.
David's breath caught.
His eyes lifted, scanning the room. Somewhere in the shadows, another battle was waiting.
But for today, he had won.